North Carolina to the SEC, Clemson to the SEC. I mean, so many different things that should just maybe happen.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. Special guest on today's show. You have probably seen his work around a time or two. Josh Pate and I are going to fix college football. Joining me here on the pod, Josh Pate of Josh Pate's College Football Show to talk about how we fix the sport. Josh, let's take on that very small menial task. Let's fix it. And I want to start on the realignment front. Report from Inside Carolina last week that North Carolina might explore joining the SEC one day. We've heard this with FSU and Clemson. They dropped their lawsuit, but then Clemson was mentioned again. Realistically, in the next 5 years or so, what would you like to see happen on the conference front to try and put the sport in a better place?
Well, if we can't go in reverse, and I'm told we can't, what I would love to see is get to it already. Basically, like anything that's going to inevitably happen, I would prefer to just happen as immediately as possible. So if that means the SEC is going to grab a whole bunch of teams or programs, whatever, so be it. Just hurry up and do it. If the Big Ten's going to do that, hurry up and go ahead and do it. Now, the way I kind of sketched it out on a pizza box the other day was if I had the SEC take essentially what is the ACC, and I had the Big Ten take essentially what is the Big 12. Just go ahead and hurry up and do that, because then what I would love you guys to do is I would also love you guys to acquire all the IP, all the naming of conferences, and as soon as you balloon up to whatever, 30, 32 teams apiece, the next snap of the fingers, 5 minutes later, should be that you immediately reestablish the Pac-10. You immediately reestablish the Big 12. I'd love to see the Southwest Conference, but we can't, beggars can't be choosers. Immediately reestablish either the Big East or the ACC. And I don't really care, nor does the general public, if technically the ownership of those brands is under the umbrella of the SEC or the Big Ten. What we care about, at least what I care about, is I would love to see the concept of a conference actually mean what a conference is supposed to mean, which is territorial. There is a lot of unique culture dynamics that are usually in play when teams from a similar geographical location are grouped together. And then you could also structure your playoff accordingly, because, you're kind of controlling who's in what conference. So if we're going that direction, go that direction with purpose. Don't just go that direction because everyone's trying to grab every asset they can. And it's also gross to talk about teams as assets, because that even further removes the soul from the entire process that is already void of a lot of soul to begin with. So if we're going that way, and I fully believe we are by 2030, do it in a healthy way. Do it in a way where the general public looks up at the end of the day and says, oh, wow, this wasn't so bad. I'm actually kind of comfortable with where we landed.
Let me throw this one at you, because this is kind of my hope. You and I see this issue, I think, in a lot of very similar ways. My hope is we do actually, at some point, move to an AFC, NFC type model, because I think what that could, emphasis on could. I don't always trust the power brokers that be in college football based on, I don't know, the last 10 to 20 years of how the sport has been governed. But my hope is that if you were to move to, a Power 2 or a college football breakaway kind of from the other sports like Chip Kelly has suggested in the past, what you could see if you have, 80 teams in that SEC Big Ten umbrella, like you mentioned, and it looks a little bit like a bigger version of the NFL, you could see a de facto return to conferences that maybe have some other matchups in there. Because when you look at what the NFL has with the NFC and the AFC, well, where do you play 2 games against each team a year in your division, right? Which is a regional matchup. My Seahawks are in the NFC West. They play the Cardinals, the LA Rams, and the 49ers twice a year. Do you think that could ever come about where we have this big break off, we have these 2 mega conferences, and they do actually set their schedules based on, hey, here are the teams that geographically make sense. So, every year Oregon, for example, would play USC, UCLA, Oregon State, Washington State, hopefully they'd get included in there with Cal and Stanford like that?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about. That's kind of the direction that I think makes the most sense. It's also the direction that would be met with the most approval from the general public, from fans. And this is, by the way, an entire enterprise, an entire multi-billion-dollar operation that exists because of mass fan interest. That is not a constant. That is a variable. And so to keep that variable where you want it, you got to keep the interest levels and the approval levels even where you want it long term, not over micro 5, 10, 15-minute spans. So, yeah, I think that's been the end goal all along. I think that's been the North Star that the Power Two have driven towards all along. Now, again, everybody hears that and everybody thinks it's inevitable you just have 2 Death Stars. But again, if you get there and then the end result is the Big Ten has acquired, I don't know what it would be, 30, let's just call it 36 or whatever, different universities, but they're split up, or let's say 32, and they're split up into 4 8-team conferences. Well, that's not really the worst thing in the world, especially if scheduling is handled properly, especially if access to your postseason playoff is handled properly. It's not the worst thing in the world. So, yeah, I think that's where we're headed. Yes, I think it'll happen in the next 10 years safely, possibly sooner than that, if it's radical in 2030. And no, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world.
If you had that big fissure in the sport, there would become, I think maybe one of the biggest questions would be which teams get included. You know, if we're saying, hey, we're going to form these 2 mega leagues, you know, are you leaving Boise State out of that? If between now and then John Summerall leads Tulane to the playoff 3 times and wins 2 American Conference championships or so, you'd probably have to win it each time. But if that happens, would they get left out? How would you approach the G5 schools if you were commissioner of college football, which God willing, we will get at least a commissioner one day. But I'm not super optimistic because that would require probably the conferences to give up a lot of power, and they haven't been too keen on doing that over the years. But how would you tackle that group of 5 angle of who gets included, who gets pulled up? Do you automatically put Oregon State and Washington State on there, Boise State, Tulane? How do you see it?
Well, my answer is I don't know how that would play out. The follow-up is I don't think a lot of people know. I don't think the decision makers know how it will play out. But what I will say is this. The second you start talking about any approach, the likes of which we're discussing now, you start having the word monopoly thrown around. And then you go quickly from just wondering, oh, will conference commissioners go for this? Will university presidents go for this? To will Congress go for this? Because it quickly becomes litigious. And so I almost wonder, let me back up. When you look at the projections on what this would do, and especially if these kinds of mega moves coincided with a consolidation of the media rights packages into a college football media deal, instead of every conference having their own, like the AFC East does not have their own TV deal. The NFL has a TV deal with every major network. There are projections that college football could increase the value of its collective media rights 3 to 5-fold if they were to consolidate all their media rights into one package. Well, I look at that. If I am heading into arbitration, if I'm in Congress and I'm R's and I'm D's and I'm blue and I'm red and I'm trying to hammer out a bill for this, I'd look at it if I were the Boise's and Tulanes of the world, and I'd want to be involved. But if I'm not going to be in the A club, you better subsidize me enough to where the B club is not only viable, but there's also access to be able to play my way into the A club. And if you don't give us that, Utah State, UL Monroe, whatever, if you don't give us that, then you're probably not going to get the votes you need in Congress. Like, I could easily see it playing out that way as well. It's very convoluted. It's very complicated. And I don't know that anyone knows how that's going to go. That's the way I could see it going, though.
Sounds like you were inching towards what I've suggested a number of times, which is a promotion relegation model in college football. I think could be really good and really fun. FCS, group of 5, and then the top tier teams, and you're playing for that championship for the right to go up and be included. You put the finances that are on the line there. I think you raise the stakes for a lot of schools. Certainly it would be difficult to get, I think, a good number of athletic directors on board with that sort of idea. But I think that could work. I'm with you on the G5 playoff because, Boise State is great, but Boise State to me is kind of a de facto Power 4 program over the last several years. You put them in the Big 12 or ACC right now. I don't think they're winning the league, but I think they're certainly a good team and better than several of the teams that are, towards the bottom of that particular conference. I haven't heard this get a ton of traction. Like, I'm trying to speak it into existence as best I can here on the program, but could you ever see a promotion relegation idea like what they have with European soccer? Maybe it's just because I'm watching Welcome to Wrexham right now. I don't know. But if that were to ever get proposed, do you think that would be a good idea for the sport?
I think it'd be mandatory. I mean, not only do I think it would be a good idea, I think it's going to be a mandatory mechanism that's baked into any of this. Because like I just said, if you're proposing a model that sort of locks in a set number of universities in the A tier, and that's it. And just because we said that's it, that's not going to fly legally. It's just not going to work. Even if I want it to happen, which I don't necessarily, but even if I wanted it to happen, that's not going to pass the smell test legally. And so you're going to have concessions. And part of those concessions is you're probably going to need promotion relegation to be baked into that for it to even be viable.
Still more coming with Josh Pate of the Josh Pate's College Football Show here on the pod. Curt Cignetti had quite the interesting response to my question last week, and he took a shot at the SEC for reasons that I don't understand. I wasn't trying to make him do that. He did that anyway. Thoughts on that and how we fix college football scheduling? First, this episode brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Time to fuel up and turn it up with the 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course or off the course, you need a little extra boost to stay sharp and energized. That is where the 5-Hour Energy Transfusion shot comes in. And if you want to turn 18 holes into 36 and you need that little pick-me-up to get you going, this is the way to do it. And I highly recommend, as an avid golfer myself, playing 36 holes instead of 18. It's more fun. You spend more time doing something that you enjoy. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off your order. Humbly, that's the best promo code this network has ever had. Just my opinion, but hey, that's what I'm paid to do. Give opinions. Locked On Golf to get 20% off your order. The offer is only valid until September 30th. On one order, cannot be used with the other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 into 36, do it. Get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. So Curt Cignetti sounded off Josh last week. I asked him about the Virginia series at Big Ten Media Days and canceling that, and I railed against it here on the show, and all of a sudden he was talking about the SEC, and I thought, wait, have we gone 5 years into the future with the Wayback Machine, but in the other direction, and Virginia's in the SEC? How did we get here? It came off a little strange to me, frankly, that he suddenly turned that around and said, yeah, the SEC, I just wanted to adopt an SEC scheduling philosophy. And I was like, well, I don't know that you did that. I'm critical of the way the SEC sets up some of their scheduling parameters, but that wasn't what I was actually asking about. How did what he said last week in Vegas land to you?
There were a bunch of dumb points made last week. There have been a bunch of dumb points made at SEC Media Days, at Big Ten Media Days, ACC. Rhett Lashley made some dumb points. A lot of these guys I love, by the way. Like, I love a lot of these dudes. I got personal relationships with a lot of them. But that doesn't absolve you from saying dumb stuff. And it's the kind of thing that you say around a 4-year-old because the 4-year-old doesn't know any better. So if you have a full-grown adult sitting in front of you, you can't tell the full-grown adult, you better go to sleep, because there's a monster out here and he comes out after 10 p.m., so you better get in bed because the adult just thinks you're high. But if you tell that to a 4-year-old, that'll motivate. Now, you lied to him. I don't advise this, but that 4-year-old will run in there and get in bed. I almost feel like I was talked to that way by Cignetti, by Rhett Lashley, by conference commissioners. The SEC handed out an entire Jonestown-esque propaganda packet down in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. So just tell the truth. Just if Curt Cignetti would walk up to his podium and say, yeah, we gutted our schedule. I mean, we completely went down to the studs and we eased it up as much as we can because we think we can game the system that way. I'd be pissed, but not at him. I'd be pissed at the system that allows
Yeah.
that to exist and the entire concept that a win is a win, which is a lie in college football, and the entire concept that you are what your record says you are, which is a bigger lie in college football. But he didn't write the rules. He's just taking advantage of them. He's doing nothing more than Dan Lanning did when he put 12 on the field intentionally last fall. He did it because the rules allowed him to do it, and he found a loophole. Well, what did they do with Lanning? They didn't do anything with him, but they closed the loophole. So similarly, until the loopholes are closed in the selection criteria, in the schedule grading and strength of schedule process, then he's free to do what he wants to do. In fact, they're free to do what they want to do no matter what. But don't try and what about your way out of it. Don't try and deflect like everyone's an idiot in the room. Everyone knows what you're doing. Everyone knows why you're doing it. To take matters further, everyone knows to a large degree why you had access to the playoff last year. And I'm not one who thinks they didn't deserve it. I think Indiana should have been in. But I think most of us know had I handed them Florida's schedule, they wouldn't have been in. So we all get what's going on right now. No one's asking you to apologize for your plight in the world, but we are asking you not to treat us like idiots and not just assume that your audience is a bunch of clapping seals, because that's not the case either.
Yeah, I look at that situation and kind of compare it to how I feel about the LA Dodgers in baseball. I don't care for the Dodgers being able to exist in the way that they do, deferring all of Ohtani's money, paying all of these guys, no salary cap. It's not good for the sport. But my frustration doesn't actually come with the Dodgers as much as it does with Major League Baseball for allowing this to happen, for operating a league that exists for a team. Because if it were my team in that position, I would want them to do all of that. Of course I would. Because if you're not cheating and you can go out there and give yourself an advantage over the rest of the league, of course you want to do that. And amazingly, I don't know if I found Cignetti's comment more objectionable. I probably didn't. Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, going out there and discussing the possibility, and I think you and I are going to be in 100% agreement on this, saying an 8-4 team should be in the playoff in any conference repulses me to my core. That just tears away at what has made college football so great for such a long time. And him saying, like, we were talking about 9-3 teams last year in the SEC. I'm so happy they didn't get in, because that means we are hanging on to, you know what, Vanderbilt beat Alabama, and it did matter at least a little, even if it doesn't mean as much as it used to, and they were still able to get close. And Ole Miss lost to Kentucky, and they were punished for that, and that was the one game that decided things. Now, of course, the urgency isn't the same, but Petitti saying 8-4 in other sports should be in the play, that's nails on a chalkboard to me.
So they're horrible at messaging. The Big Ten's just horrible at
really
messaging.
Bad.
And we've tried to give them an opportunity. I'll request someone once to be on the show. I'm not doing it twice. So, I mean, we reached out to the league office. I would have loved to have had Tony on the show. Unbeknownst to him, he's got a pretty friendly person in me when it comes to some of the general ideas he has about the playoff. But they horrifically fumbled the messaging of it. So if you're pitching your concepts, you pitch the merits of the concept. And if you have to do it comparatively, like if I'm arguing the AQ format versus the at-large format, I'm arguing the merits and benefits of the AQ format versus the potential downsides of the at-large. I'm not going up there and voluntarily tossing out hypotheticals. 8-4 team. No one's gone 8-4. The season hypothetically hasn't even played out yet. You don't have to do that. It's just taking a crowbar to your own shins. And I talked to a number of people last week who were at Big Ten Media Days. I'm talking about national types, big names in the space. And one after the other, they sort of echoed the same sentiments. Like, we can't get Tony. We can't get Tony. And so I'm thinking to myself, it's not that he owes anyone interviews. That's not what it's about. But I just came from Atlanta. I just came from a part of the country where, I kid you not, I watched Greg Sankey do an interview on Wetumpka, Alabama radio and fully espoused the message and the beliefs of the SEC way of doing things, and whatever their philosophy is on scheduling and whatever their philosophy is on the playoff. So everybody's in lockstep. down there, at least with understanding what he thinks. The messaging is just, it's old hat for him. And he's a pretty wise dude. Now, I happen to not agree with Greg Sankey on what he thinks would be the best model for the playoff, but he does a heck of a lot better job at explaining it than Tony Petitti does. And the SEC does a heck of a lot better job of laying their truth out than the Big Ten does. So the Big Ten's been a train wreck in messaging this, and it squarely falls on their shoulders. And that's almost independent of whether you agree or disagree with what their ideas are. They suck at delivering the ideas.
My scheduling fix looks like this. Every single Power 4 team, if you don't go to the AFC, NFC model, has one FCS game. I'm okay with that. I do play-by-play for an FCS school. I fully understand and appreciate how important those games are. And once every 8 years or so, an FCS team wins an FBS game. It's a big deal for that program. I'm good with that. One group of 5 and one Power 4. And how you schedule the Power 4, I think, should be a 2-year rotating window based on the conference standings, and you set up kind of a college basketball style conference challenge, ACC against Big 12, Big 10 SEC. Those two teams based on conference standings rotate for 2 years with a home and home, and then you switch conferences and you rotate around. If you could set up college football scheduling within the current framework of the sport to make it better for all involved, how would you do it?
I would explore a version of scheduling like that. I almost thought about this the other day. So there's no controversy-free way of measuring resumes at the end of the year when you have such vast disparity in strength of schedule, not just conference to conference, but I mean, if you looked at Missouri's schedule versus Oklahoma's this year, they're in the same conference, like they're in the same league, and there's no comparison. So I almost thought about doing like a point system. And if I were a committee member, this is how I would do it. Like, this is how I wouldn't even announce it. I don't need it to be adopted as the like law of the land, but I would internally, I would go to the best data person I know. And I would say, develop me a merit-based point system instead of me looking at how many top 25 wins you have, which is an absurdly stupid metric. So that's what I would do. And I would look at it personally, and I would try and sort of beta test it for a few years and see if it's true. And then I would debut that to the world. And I'd let you know what the criteria are beforehand. You're going to get this many points per this caliber win. Now, look, power raters, bookmakers, they have long since adopted this philosophy to set lines, to set power ratings and whatnot. But to apply it to a merit-based selection process at the end of the year, I think would make sense, because what I'm doing is I'm giving you the end of the story. From that, you can backfill the way that you do scheduling. I am all for, like, I know there's a philosophy out there that thinks the league office ought to take it out of the university's hands and they ought to set the scheduling. If you wanted to go that route, I'd be okay with that. I don't think it's realistic that we go that route. So if we don't go that route, I'm fine leaving it in your hands. But you know what? If you're going to go the route of scheduling the FCS team and not elsewhere loading up your schedule, then you better beat everybody by 50, or you're not going to have as high a point total at the end of the year. And you better get comfortable with the fact that there are going to be some 9-3s out there that trump some 10-2s out there. There may be a 9-3 that trumps an 11-1 out there, because this is college sports. It's not pro sports. So I would just love for the parameters to be more identified. That's always been my beef, a lot more so than what the schedules are. Although I do agree, I would love to see every schedule as robust as possible.
I don't want schools to have control of their non-conference exactly for the Indiana reason. And this isn't the first time it's happened. You know, the Ohio State canceling on Washington, maybe that was a prelude because they knew Big Ten realignment was on the horizon. And maybe it was the same with Michigan and UCLA. But when those sorts of things get canceled, you know, Michigan in their national championship season, I believe, was supposed to play UCLA in a then non-conference battle. It should be a non-conference battle, but college football doesn't make that much sense. And then you looked at UCLA and Michigan's schedules, and I don't know who television executives don't win. Not as many people want to watch, 3 FCS blowout sorts of games. Fans don't win because they don't want to see those sorts of games. It's not as much fun for people like you and me who talk about the sport. It's not as much fun for the players because they're not in, you go to these big schools to play against big time programs, right? Like you don't go there so that you can beat up on Southwest Missouri State Technical Institute. Like you go there because you want to play in those sorts of settings. So that's why I want schools to take it away, because as long as we don't have the sort of criteria you're talking about, I think you're going to see schools go the way of Indiana. And that's why I applaud programs like LSU that has a strong non-conference consistently, or Notre Dame and Clemson with the 12-year arrangement starting in 2027. Great. Give me more of that. I just don't know where the incentive structure necessarily is under the current playoff format rules. We're going to take one last break. I have a question for Josh, and we've done a lot of agreeing on today's show, and we are going to put a quick and sudden stop to that to end the program today. So Josh, one question I have for you, and what you were talking about earlier on the show, is the point system. How would that, if you were to be able to put, the scheduling metric together, be different than what the committee is, I think, trying to do, which is, hey, we are not going to treat every win the same. I agree. We shouldn't try to, look at it the same way as the NFL, because it just plainly isn't. But how would that system be different than what the committee does right now with valuing their own top 25 wins?
Well, it would essentially remove the need for the committee, but it would also let you know going into a season what the point system is, how many points you get for accomplishing this. Like, this is the way I explained it to a guy the other day. If McLaughlin U goes and plays New Mexico State and you win by 3, and I go to Oregon and I lose by 3, I think I had a much more impressive Saturday performance than you did, but you won your game and I lost my game. So we either stick in a Stone Age mentality of, well, winning's the most important thing, and he won and you lost, so he had the better day, or we understand the vast disparity in strength of schedule, strength of opponent in college football blended over a 12-game sample size, and we think it needs to go a little deeper than that. So, for example, I don't know how I'd calibrate it because I'm not a data scientist guy. I'd get someone to do it for me. But I am looking at Ohio State going to Oregon last year. Although that's a conference game, it could just as easily be LSU going to Clemson. If LSU loses at the gun against Clemson, 28-27, something like that, I'm not punishing them for that. I'm not rewarding them as much as I would had they won the game. Like, don't get me wrong. I know winning matters and it's paramount, but I'd much rather see them do that than schedule Southeast Louisiana State, Roast Beef Tech University, and bring them into Tiger Stadium and win 60-7. Well, they're 1-0. There you go. They're 1-0. Well, yeah, they are. They didn't challenge themselves, though. Anyone theoretically could do that. So however we decided the point system, that's the way I would make the data public, and I would let you see it play out. And you're letting the university see it play out, and you're letting coaches see it play out. Now, there are some pitfalls there, but there are pitfalls in any model right now. And so it's kind of something I throw out. Like, I throw the idea out more than saying I've got mountains of research on it. I just love to see it explored, because what I can't stand is getting feedback from a committee where they throw out this subjective nonsense. Like, well, we really think they're playing good ball right now. I couldn't care less that an athletic director thinks you're playing good ball, or they've got a lot of momentum right now. Well, what does that even mean? That has no business being criteria in a selection process or a rankings process.
Now, you think Brett Yormark is very wrong to support the 5+11 format, which means you also think I am very wrong, because I like it, and I'll lay out my case, and then I'll allow you to present the other side of it. The objection I see is, well, the playoff committee is just going to load in SEC and Big Ten teams, especially the SEC. They're going to get what they want. This is what the SEC really wants. I look at what we currently have, of course, is 5+7, and I would rather the playoff stay there, never expand another team in the history of the sport, but I'm not very optimistic about that. I think it'll get to 24 one day, because someone will make the FCS point. Like, look at what they do with the FCS ranks. They have 24 teams down there. We should do that. So going for the automatic bids in a 16-team format, I think actually guarantees the SEC gets 5 teams in, because you have 4-4, 2-2, 1, and then the 3 at-larges as well. I think the SEC is a pretty solid lock to get one of those. The reason I like 5+11 is because you create an element of mystery for teams and programs in games that don't allow them to kind of gimmick their way in of like, oh yeah, I lost this game early in the year, but look, I did well in the conference and that's, good and fine, but now I'm automatically in no matter what. So I don't like that. And I think that you guarantee 5 SEC bids, 4-4, 2-2, 1-3. I think the math adds up there. Whereas in a 5+11, you guarantee 1, and we're coming off a 5+7 format season in which the SEC was banging the drum and beating down the door. Our 9-3 teams should get in, and the committee looked at them and said, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to leave your teams out. So I don't know that there is that ingrained level of bias towards the SEC on the committee based on last season that people like you that are critical of 5+11 think.
Let me remind you, comparing last year to anything in the future is little apples to oranges because the selection criteria and the grading process is being changed. So if you kept last year as the same, copy it and paste it into the future, it is my understanding that with nothing changing other than the selection criteria, factoring strength of schedule differently, you'd probably get Alabama in over SMU using last year's example. So everyone understand that as a side note. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying that's probably the way it's going to go. All right. I don't care about the playoff. That's the first thing you need to know about my stance on this. I couldn't care less about it. I care about the regular season. So every motivation I have for supporting a playoff format is with one thing in mind, and that is how do I maximize urgency on regular season games? So in the AQ model, I don't support the AQ model, or I support the AQ model with no at-larges. So the proposal you're talking about, you are right. If it was a 16-team AQ, but there were 3 at-larges, you're right. A bunch of SEC teams would lose or Big Ten teams would lose, and they just fall into that safety net. The trade-off for me, if I were negotiating this, is I'm going to give you your AQ model, but it's going to be 14. There is no at-large. That's why those play-in games on that Saturday are really play-in games, if I get my way. There is no, number 6 in the SEC goes to play number 3, but if number 3 loses, it's okay. They still got insurance. They'll just fall in one of the at-large spots. I'm not interested in that. So what I do in the hypothetical is I take an 8-1 Tennessee. I think of an 8-1 Tennessee in early November. Fill in the blank. Any major conference program here. I'm just using Tennessee. 8-1 Tennessee early November is probably ranked top 5, top 7. They're way up there. It's a 1-loss SEC team approaching or past Halloween. That team knows in the 5+11 that they can afford to lose 2 of their final 3 games. And they know that they're going to lock down one of those AQ spots because they will end up being a 9-3 SEC team. And there is no 9-3 SEC team being left out of a 16-team playoff. It's just not going to happen. In my model, in the AQ model, not only does Tennessee know they need to keep winning, if they go as far as to lock down the number 3 overall seed in the SEC, it still means nothing. Even then, they're not guaranteed a playoff spot. All they're guaranteed is an opportunity to probably host the number 6 SEC team on that play-in Saturday. And if they lose, they're cooked. So there's urgency on every single conference game and every single college football game, therefore, all the way through the finish line, all the way through the end of November. And then you go into that first Saturday, which would be transformative for the sport. I probably think that play-in Saturday would trump whatever the playoff gives you. And I would enjoy that infinitely more than watching the 5+11 model, where I know, man, if I'm 1 loss or better early November, I'm playing for seeding. Yeah, I want to have a high seed. I've got motivation to win still. There's no urgency. And what you're doing, by the way, when you're talking about urgency on games, my gripe with playoff expansion in general has always been these people who tell me, well, there are more meaningful games. Well, what they're talking about is there are more games where the winner or loser could have their playoff fate determined. But really, nothing's changed about the capability of winning a national title. You still, in any given field, got a few teams. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 4, but there are only a few teams capable of winning the title. They're always comfortably in the playoff. More times than not, they're comfortably in. We are manufacturing drama on games featuring teams trying to lock down an 11 seed that we know good and well aren't going on to win it all. And we are removing the drama from the games featuring the teams capable of winning the whole thing. That's a proposal and a trade-off that's never made sense to me, just like the 5+11 doesn't make sense to me. But that's because I don't look at the playoffs solely as a playoff product. I look at it in terms of how it impacts the regular season. And one's detrimental to the regular season, and the other somehow, some way actually enhances the regular season.
I like the point you bring up about who the season suddenly gets more important for. You know, I've heard Klatt make this point a lot. Like, you have more meaningful games because this now has playoff implications. For a team that has the best possible outcome in all likelihood of pulling a huge upset and then getting their doors blown off in the next week. Because what I think it's really easy for college football fans and media people to forget in the offseason because we have to wait so long before we start seeing games again. At the end of a college football season, we know who's good because we have 12 weeks and conference championship weekend. We got 13 games for some teams worth of evidence at the end of every year. We're fully aware who is good enough and who isn't. Miami was playing for, in retrospect, their playoff lives a season ago when they went to Syracuse and ultimately got upset. And so, yeah, there's still some urgency on that particular game. We all watched Miami throughout the year down 21 points at Cal, down in the second half to Duke, that were, you know, average to slightly above average teams in the ACC. Like, we all knew Miami wasn't going to go win a national championship. Cam Ward carried them as far as he possibly could, but the defense was atrocious. Like, we all had that understanding, and we just kind of choose, I think, in these playoff discussions to forget that. To just forget that at the end of every season, like, we know how good these teams are, and I'm with you on the point of, you know, teams that can win it all are the ones getting a freebie in expansion. And I was laughing the other day when I heard your interview with Danny Cannell, who was saying, yeah, maybe we should slow down on expansion before we get there. Like, oh man, I can't believe you want to, you know, pump the brakes a little bit here. Because Michigan, the best example is Michigan-Ohio State last year. That was one of the probably 3 biggest upsets in the sport in the last 5-10 seasons. I mean, mathematically, they were 22.5-point dogs. Like, that was every bit as shocking as you remember. And yet, the implications were the greatest internally between those two fan bases because that hatred and rivalry is not going away. But for us who are not Michigan or Ohio State fans, we watched it and thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe they lost. Oh, it didn't matter. And so whenever someone tries to argue to me that, well, you know, you have all these more games that matter. Yeah, but the games that involve the championship teams matter so much less. And that to me takes away from it. And I think that there are way too many conversations around the playoff that just ignore that fact and don't point out, you know, hey, these big games that we all love just don't mean as much.
Yeah, and let's keep in mind now, the Ohio State and Michigan point is a really layered point because a lot of people are using it in bad faith. A lot of people are listening to maybe the argument you're making, argument I'm making, and saying, well, no, the expanded playoff hasn't really devalued the regular season. Case in point, look at Ohio State, Michigan. That game had maximum urgency, and it was volatile, and everyone was on the edge of their seat, and Ohio State lost, and they went on to win the whole thing, and so it didn't remove any of the meaning from it. Well, that was the first go-around. Like, that was the first version of the expanded playoff. My question would be, now that everyone saw how it ended, because we didn't know the end of the book at the point, but now that everyone saw how it ended, and the loser of that game, which should have been the end of the world for them, second loss, not first loss, the loser of that game, Ohio State, just regrouped and went and won the thing anyway, which in retrospect renders the outcome very neutered for anyone who's not an Ohio State, Michigan fan. Now that you've seen that, fast forward a year, who's to say that doesn't happen again somewhere in the sport? Fast forward another year, fast forward 5 years, who's to say if we just kept on the current trajectory, we wouldn't have half a dozen examples of really big, what would have been catastrophic losses, and the end results just, oh, well, you're in the playoff anyway. Then I don't think there are many people telling me through their actions and habits that the games would still mean the same to them. Like, the Ohio State Michigan's a bad faith example for people who are making it and saying, oh, the playoff hadn't hurt anything. You don't know because that was the first go around. Your mind hasn't been retrained at how to look at regular season games yet because that was the first test study.
Can I throw one at you that could happen this year with the same situation? Clemson goes to South Carolina. I think that could very easily. I think Clemson has got some similarities to Ohio State last year. Veteran quarterback, high level returning production, coach I know can win those sorts of games. I think Clemson could go 10-2 and win the national championship this year. They could lose that game. They could go to South Carolina, lose that rivalry game, which is entirely possible. South Carolina is my preseason number 5 team in my preseason SEC power rankings. Like, that's a darn good football team. I think we all like and are excited to watch Lenora Sellers. Clemson could lose that game and do the exact same thing. Do you think that's crazy?
No. If the field's big enough, none of it's crazy. We're also sort of bleeding into another layer of stupidity in this argument. And I got some people who look me straight in the eye and use Ohio State winning it all last year as evidence that my concept is flawed. And I almost listened to it with a crooked face. And their argument is, well, see, the best team in the country ended up being the 8th seed. If we were in the old model, they wouldn't have even made it in. And they think it's a gotcha moment. And I look at them and I say, I know. That's why I want the old model. That's why I supported not expanding or was against expanding. There are two things here. There is, are you technically capable of winning the whole thing if you get put in, versus do you deserve to be in? Those two things are not the same. Ohio State could have had a 3rd loss on their resume last year and been capable of winning the thing if I put them in the tournament. The question's not, could they do it? The question was, do they deserve to be in? And I guess the answer changes depending on how far you go down the expansion rabbit hole. Eventually, you can just expand and put everybody in. You can expand and go 32, 64, because then I could quench all the thirst of, hey, more football is always good football. Like, there's some really dumb arguments that are being made out there, not by a fringe portion of society. Like, some of this is mainstream, like, adopted thought on this, and it's crazy.
We could probably go for a couple hours, but I'll get you out of here on this so my boss doesn't get too upset with me. By 2032 or 31, let's say 2031, by the time that big next realignment shift could happen, not a guarantee as I've discussed, but definitely it is feasible and could have some good outcomes. Between now and then, does the Big 12 win a national championship?
I'm just going to say yes. I'm going to say yes, knowing that I don't have to name the team. I think that, look, with your mark, the one thing, we didn't really hit on this, but the one thing that I wonder is your mark's resistance to the 5+11. And even admitting in the short term, it may not be in the Big 12's best interest, but they think long term it's in college football's best interest. Now, I disagree with him fundamentally, but I also wonder, because he keeps talking like someone who knows something the rest of the world doesn't. Like, he keeps feeling like he's positioning the Big 12, knowing that something fortuitous is coming for the Big 12 that will make sense down the road. I don't know what that could be. I just wonder, like, is he blindly rolling the dice? Because guys who are as successful as him don't tend to blindly do anything. But from the outside looking in, that's kind of what it appears he's doing with his opinions right now. So I just wonder, and I'm gonna blindly bet that he does know what he's talking about. Therefore, I'm gonna blindly say yes, somebody's gonna win it before 2030, whatever.
When Texas Tech wins it all in 2029, this is going to be the most obnoxious college football podcast in the country. And we're glad to have had Josh Pate from Josh Pate's College Football Show. Great stuff. Appreciate you stopping by. I hope you all enjoyed the interview. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.